Corinthians who wrote Paul. I can see one of them writing Paul. Dear Paul, these fellows down here who are ignorant don't know any better, but I know better. Because since I've become a Christian, I know fine well those idols are just sticks and stones. And consequently, the meat they offer there is just ordinary meat, and it's not contaminated. And I'll be telling the brethren, I'll eat that meat any time. And that idol is nothing, you know, and you can see him kicking at a big idol, you say. I don't care about the idol, I'm going to eat the meat anyway. And Paul says, well, and you can hear him say with a sigh, you know, well, we all know now the way of knowledge, don't we? And we know that an idol's nothing, right? And the fellow says, right, Paul, you say. And then Paul will say to him, well, no, not right. Not everybody understands this. Now, you and me, good brother, we know that. And then you can see the Corinthian old chest getting up there, you know. That's right, Paul, you and me know about it. You and me know about idols nothing, and he hits another kick, you say, to stress his point. But Paul says, let me tell you something about knowledge. Knowledge puffs up. And he's not too sure that he likes that, you say, from Paul. But he listens on anyway. Paul says, knowledge puffs up, but love edifies. And you can see this Corinthian fellow begin to mumble, you know. And Paul says, let me tell you something else. He that thinks he knows anything, he knows nothing yet as he ought to know. So he's bragging on his piece of knowledge, you see. Paul says, oh yes, you know about the idol. You know the nature of the idol, but do you know the nature of Jesus? That's the question. Oh, it's true that the eating of the meat is of no consequence relative to the idol and relative to your relationship with God. You know the idol, okay. But what would Jesus do? Do you know Jesus? Well, the fellow would say, well, of course I know Jesus. Well, what would Jesus have done? Well, this fellow maybe not answer. Paul would answer for him. Jesus would have given up his liberty. Because, you see, one can know a whole lot but not love his brother. And Paul says the big question is not what is right or wrong per se, but what will edify my brother? And that's his 3 big points in these 3 chapters. Number 1, nothing must be judged merely in the light of knowledge. Nothing. Nothing must be judged merely in the light of knowledge. Number 2, everything must be done unto edifying. And number 3, he sets forth in chapter 9 the power of a personal example. But look at those 2 points I've mentioned. Here's what he's telling the Corinthian. Here's the whole story of chapters 8 through 10. Here it is. Nothing, no question must be taken care of simply and solely by knowledge. Okay, the idol's nothing. Okay, to eat meat or to not eat it doesn't affect you one way or another. What does it do for your brother? That's the question. Okay, so smoking in itself is not wrong, let's say. What does it do to your brethren? What does it do to people on the outside? Okay, he said, so you can show to me that you have the liberty to eat these meats. Yes, you have the liberty. But what are you going to do with your weak brother? Oh, he's an ignoramus, says this knowing one. Well, I know that. I know that. He's been raised his life, all his life with idols. And he just can't shake it off yet, that the idol's nothing. Well, that's his funeral, says the Corinthian. Who knows better? Paul says, I say, you don't care about your brother. Oh, I care about him, all right. Well, if you cared about him, if you really loved him, what would you do for him? I'd die for him, you know, would you? How about giving up your meat, eating for him? Would you do that? Well, something else. You're asking for something else, you say. We discussed this 8 through 10 in school. And one of the men, after we talked about just generally this way for about 30 minutes, said to me, and his eyes were wide open, he said, man, this is an impeachment upon my liberties. I said, bless your heart, that's exactly right. Because Christianity goes beyond the lawful. Its question is not, is it lawful? Its question is, does it edify the brethren? Things may be lawful and don't edify the brethren. He goes on to say this. The real question is, not do you know if it's lawful, but are you willing to so act as to edify the brothers? He says there, if any man thinketh he knoweth anything, he knoweth nothing yet as he ought to know, verse 2. But if any man loveth God, the same is known by God. That's how you get God's attention. You love God, and you get God's attention, and God knows you. In 1 John chapter 4, verses 7 and 8, we're told there that the fellow who loves God is born of God and knoweth him. But verse 8 tells us, he that loveth not knoweth not God. And John's read to the Greek, same as Paul is. Paul says, if you don't love God, if you don't love your brethren, you don't really know God at all. Oh, sure, you know the idol. Sure, you understand the meat issue. But you don't really know God. For if you really knew God in Christ Jesus, you wouldn't come up with this haughty attitude. Oh, I can eat it. You would think, what will it do for the brethren? That's what you would do. You would forfeit your liberties. That is chapter 8, 9, and 10. We'll get to the text in a moment. A Corinthian, having spent the greater portion of his life worshiping idols, might well find it difficult to believe the idols were nothing but pieces of stone and wood. Some learned this truth and scorned the slower disciples because of this blindness. Many Jews, having spent the greater part of their lives avoiding certain meats, might well find it difficult to accept all meats as edible. Some might even be vegetarians. These were looked down upon by the men of superior knowledge, and to aggravate the situation, the uninformed sometimes despised the informed one, thinking he was compromising the truth. Then, too, the convert with a conscience about eating the meat might see the knowledgeable brother eating such meat and eat himself because of the example. He eats, however, against his conscience, and in doing so, he sins against himself and thus sins against God. The weak brother lacked the knowledge, but the wise brother lacked what? Yeah, he lacked love, that's right. Since it was a matter of moral indifference, one way or another, he says in 8:8, whether you eat or don't eat, doesn't make any difference. That's 8:8. Since it was a matter of moral indifference, the weak brother was no more than weak and ignorant, but the wise brother was uncharitable when insisting on exercising his liberty. Picture a fellow sitting down here at a table, and the meat is brought out, you see, and the weak brother says to this knowledgeable brother, hey, this meat this man is offering us is part of a sacrifice was given to the idol, see? So the knowing brother gives him that look, great day, So he says to the host, pass the meat, And then he maybe say, well, I know some brethren don't know any better. That old dead idol, give me that meat. Pass the steak, And then this good brother, the weak one, is caught between two fires now. Number one, the knowledgeable brother knows better and he's going to eat it. But more than that, the weak brother is made to look ridiculous in the presence of this unbeliever. Well, that would provoke him maybe to eat, see, and sin against his conscience. The stronger brother should not get on that way. He should, with the weak brother being there, he should refuse to eat. And if the weak brother is going to be scorned, the strong one should stand by him, see. And they should be joined together and in his charity, his love for that brother, he ought to stand by him. But that's not what they were doing. They were really, I know my rights, and I'll have my rights, by George, I want to eat that meat. Paul says, well, bully for you. You're really knowing fellows, aren't you? But if you love the Lord, then you get to know him. Then you get to know him, and then he knows you. So, what have we got then? We've got this. To know things is wonderful. Knowledge frees people from the shackles of fear and ignorance and the bond of error. To know is wonderful, but to love, that's supreme. Not that knowledge and love are incompatible. On the contrary, you can love God without knowing him. But at the same time, man's intellectual ability, his knowledge, that is acquired knowledge, in the immature, produces a feeling of self-importance and self-sufficiency. It causes the man who knows to isolate himself from the ignorant and look down his nose at him. He who doesn't see the true status of knowledge, he who doesn't see the true status of knowledge, that is, as an aid to serve God and man, doesn't really know as he ought to know. Okay, so I know certain things. If I don't know why I'm supposed to know, I don't really know at all. Okay, God, I know your will, but why has God given you the knowledge of his will? If you don't know that, you don't know. And these brethren didn't know. Listen, we've already said 1 John 4, 7 and 8. It's interesting to see that the love of God is introduced into this section that deals with knowledge and with liberty. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, let's turn there, please. In 1 Corinthians chapter, well, let's make it 12, 30 and following. He said, have all the same gifts of healing? Do all speak with tongues? Do all interpret? No, they don't. The answer is no each time. Well, he says, but desire earnestly the greater gifts. What for? So as to edify the brethren and to get to know the Lord. But moreover, I show unto you a most excellent way. King James says a more excellent way, but a most excellent way. What way is that? It's the way of love. A way to what? A way to get to know God and to edify the brethren. You see, chapter 12 deals with a bunch of people who had no gifts, and another bunch of people who had gifts. The prophet was saying, I'm the fella. The tongue speaker says, no, I'm the fella. The ungifted one says, I've got no gift at all. I'm not a part of the body. I'm not important. Paul says that's not true. That's not true. Each member in the body has his own place. Each member in the body has something to contribute. He says, now I want you to contribute. I want you to look for the better way. Let me show you a most excellent way. Way to what? To know God and to edify the brethren, to contribute. How's it done? What is that way? It's the way of loving the brethren. And watch how he proves it. He said, if I spoke with the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, and become sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal, and if I have the gift of prophecy and know all mysteries, and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I'm nothing. You know what he said in verse 2? In verse 2 he said, I've had a complete revelation. Not just at my disposal, but a complete revelation in my head. If I had a complete revelation and didn't have love, it's useless. Useless to me. Now he goes down verse 9, 8. He said, love doesn't fail, but where there's prophecies, they'll be done away. Whether there be tongues, they'll cease. Whether there be knowledge, that's miraculous knowledge, it'll be done away. He said these gifts will by and by be done away. He doesn't say when. He doesn't say when. He just says by and by they'll be done away. Love never fails. It'll always be there. But these gifts, these miraculous gifts, will pass away one day. He says, for we know in part and we prophesy in part. He said the knowledge that you Corinthians have is what? Partial. He said you have partial knowledge by the gifts. But what? But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part will be done away. He says your partial knowledge gained by these gifts will vanish when that which is perfect has come. But what is that which is perfect? Well, it's generally held to be among us the written New Testament. But that's not what it is at all. Up in 13:2, he said, if I had a complete revelation in my head, that's not the answer. I still wouldn't know. I still wouldn't it wouldn't profit me. Oh, I'd be able to tell all these things and profit the brethren. But me, if I had a full and complete revelation in my head, and I didn't have love, I'm still only half a man. I still really don't know. For he that loveth not knoweth not God. But what happens when love enters a man's life? Look what happens. Verse 10. But when that which is perfect is come, the partial, that which is in part, shall be done away. A completeness will enter in. When I was a child, I spake as a child, I felt as a child, I thought as a child. But now that I am become a man, I have put away childish things. Maturity has come when that which is perfect has come. Maturity has come. Now these brethren were bragging on their gifts, and that showed a childishness that shouldn't have been with them. But they bragged about them and were childish because they weren't mature. And they were not mature because they depended simply and solely upon the miraculous gifts for their knowledge of God. Notice what he says, for now we see in a mirror darkly. A man who depends only on the gifts, the miraculous gifts, how much does he know? Oh, he knows some, but he didn't know very much. Take the fellow back there in 1 Corinthians chapter 8. He knew about the idol. He knew about the right to eat meats and all that there, but he didn't really know very much. He didn't know God. He knew the idol, but he didn't know God. And back in 8:3 he says, but he that loveth God, the same is known by God. And here we have in verse 12, for now we see in a mirror darkly, but then face to face, that is clearly. Now I know in part, now I have a partial knowledge, but then shall I know fully, even as also I was fully known. Well, how was he known? 8:3 says he was known when he loved the Lord. And when he falls in love with the Lord, he will see God like he had not seen him before. With all these gifts, that's great, says Paul. But that's not what helps a man really know God. Knowledge puffs up, but love gets right to the heart of God. He that loveth God is born of God, and knoweth God. He that loveth not doesn't know God. I don't care what gifts you've got, he says. If you've got all the tongues of angels and all the mysteries are at your disposal, and you have all the faith of all the miracles, if you don't love, you don't know God. And he says, now what have you got with all your gifts? A partial knowledge of God. But how will you really get to know him? How will you see God clearly? By letting love dominate your life. That's what he tells him. Verse 14:1. Follow after love, yet desire earnestly spiritual gifts. Now the gifts are good. They give some knowledge of God. They give a partial knowledge of God. But to really know God, to have a mature. Now when he says there, then shall I know, verse 12, the last piece, then shall I know fully, even as also I was fully known. He's not talking about absolute knowledge. We will never have absolute knowledge at any time. We will never know God as God knows us. We will never know ourselves as God knows us. He's not talking about absolute knowledge at all. He's talking about a perfect knowledge. And the word perfect, as you know, in the New Testament never means flawless. It means a mature, well-rounded knowledge. And Paul teaches here that when the perfect comes into a man's life, he's no longer a child. He no longer has a partial view of God. He's got a well-rounded, good, deep view of God. Love is what's perfect, not the written New Testament. Look at us today. Look at us today. We have a written New Testament. Do we know fully, even as we are known? But the people who love the Lord, and they know Him. Now, even as doesn't mean to the same degree. It means in the same manner. You remember in the book of John chapter 15, Jesus said, "A new commandment that I give unto you, that you love one another, even as I loved you." Well, now, He wasn't telling them to love each other as deeply as He loved them. That was impossible. What He wanted them to do was to love them in the same manner as He did, to serve one another. And that's important. Now, this is relative to chapter 8 through 10. For the law of chapter 8 through 10 is, love the brethren. And if you love the brethren, you will conduct yourself in a certain fashion. What is that certain fashion? You will do always that which edifies. Even when you know that you have the liberty, you will give your liberty up. That will prove that you know the heart of God. Look at Jesus. Look what He gave up. Look what He gave up. Look what He did. Look who He walked with. Look at the weaknesses He put up with. That's love, all right. There you see God right there. Now, the man who falls in love with these brethren and serves these brethren, he really knows God. The man who says, well, I know the idol and I'm going to have my rights. Yeah, he knows the idol, but he hadn't really got a good look at God. He doesn't know God. He doesn't know as he ought to know. Because knowledge is given by God simply to serve God and serve the brethren. All right. Let's get through chapter 8. Now, concerning things sacrificed to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Hear Him sigh it out. Knowledge puffeth up, but love edifieth. There's a difference. But why did He bring that in? Because the brethren needed to be told it. He said, the knowledge, you remember that letter you wrote me and told me you knew all that was going on? He said, so you do. But you know what knowledge does for you? It puffs you up. It puffs you up. But love edifies. Now, knowledge blows you up, but love builds you up. Knowledge blows the man up, but love builds the brethren up. If any man thinketh that he knoweth anything, he knoweth nothing yet as he ought to know. He said, if you don't realize that knowledge is to serve the brother, good, you don't know at all. Verse 3, but if any man loveth God, the same is known of him. God has been attracted to the man. If the man loves God, he is known by God. And later on, Paul says, let the perfect come into your life, and you will know even as you're known. Concerning, therefore, the eating of things sacrificed to idols, we know that no idol is anything in the world, and that there is no God but one. For though there be that are called gods, whether in heaven or in earth, as there are gods many and lords many, yet to us there is one God, the Father, of whom are all things, and we unto Him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom are all things, and we through Him. Howbeit, there's not an all in that knowledge. He said, come on. Everybody doesn't understand that. But some being used until now to the idol, eat as of a thing sacrificed to an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. But food will not commend us to God. He says to these other fellows, you're right. Food will not commend us to God, neither if we eat not are we the worst, nor if we eat are we the better. Therefore, don't eat, is what he's really telling them. Verse 9, but take heed, lest by any means this liberty of yours become a stumbling block to the weak. For if a man see thee who has knowledge sitting at the meat in an idol's temple, now he'll deal with the idol's temple fully later on here. But if a man who is weak sees you sitting at meat in an idol's temple, will not his conscience, if he is weak, be emboldened to eat things sacrificed to idols? For through your knowledge, note that, it's through your knowledge he that is weak perishes. the brother for whose sake Christ died. He said, now, buddy, take heed about this liberty of yours. Oh, you know, you're right, you're dead right. But through your knowledge, your brother can die. Now, love will never cause him to be lost, but your knowledge might. So what's the greater? The greater is love. The question then is not simply, have I the right to eat because I know the idol is not anything worth anything? Paul says, you're right. The idol is not anything, and you know very well, and that's good, and I'm happy you know. But that's not the real question. You're missing the point. What you want to do is stress your right to eat. What I want you to stress is your right to give up your liberty for the benefit of your brother. What that Corinthian, the knowing one, wanted was the imprimatur of Paul on his right to eat. Paul says that's not the big question. The big question is, what are you going to do with that weak brother? Oh, I want to exercise my right, says the Corinthian. Paul says, well, will you exercise it, even if it means hurting your brother? Oh, I'm going to have my way. Paul says, well, you may know the idol, but you don't know God. Christ died for your brother, for your weak brother. What are you willing to do for him? Oh, give me that. This is my liberty. I'm aware of that, says Paul. Of course it's your liberty. Christ died for that brother of yours, weak and all as he is. What are you wanting to do? I'll eat the meat. Oh, of course you will. You don't know Jesus. Good brother, you don't know Jesus. If you don't love the brethren, you don't know him. I don't care how much you can tell me about the idol. You don't know the Lord if you don't love the brethren. That is 8 through 10. But somebody says, well, if you start doing that there, you'll maybe have to do everything. Oh, I don't know if that's true or not. But even if it is, if it's your liberty, you may want to give it up to save somebody's soul. I love my brother, I say, but I don't love him enough to give up my liberty when that liberty, the exercise of that liberty, may cause his destruction. Well, I don't really know the Lord because the Lord died for that good brother. And here's some people. Well, Romans 14 deals with the same problem. This old fellow's got his problem with his Christmas trees. Maybe his pork eating. Okay, so I know better than that. Christmas tree, never mind what J.R. says. It's all right to have a Christmas tree, but suppose you were in an area where it really meant something to a brother, and you knew better than that. Would you be willing to forego putting up a Christmas tree is the question. Or suppose he was raised a pork-eating individual. He was raised against pork eating. Would you insist upon your right because Jesus made all meats clean? Of course you've got a liberty to eat any meat you want. Of course you've got a liberty to eat pork. How much does your liberty mean to you? How much does it mean to you? Set it up on the one side. How much does that liberty mean to you? It means enough that I'd kill that brother. And you love the Lord, huh? And you know Jesus, right? And you eat that stupid meat and down your brother, and you're telling me that you know the Lord, huh? Who are you kidding? But you notice, he doesn't badly beat the fella who didn't want to give up his liberty. Because the man who will not give up his liberty is weak also in his own way. He thinks he's strong. See? But the truth of the matter is that he's a slave to his liberty. What is the liberty has become to him? The master. I will have my rights. I've got to do it. Now we'll go through with it, come what may. He knows the idol, but he doesn't know the Lord. Because he says, my right to eat my meat is worth the death of a brother. And Jesus looked at that weak brother, and he said to him, weak and all as you are, not only will I give up a liberty about eating meat, but I'll give my life for you. Corinthian, are you a follower of me? Oh, I know you, Lord. Do you? Do you? Verse 12. And thus sinning against the brethren, and notice he said sinning against the brethren, and wounding their conscience when it is weak, you sin against Christ. Well, that really gets through right there. You know, Christianity goes beyond the law, way beyond the law. Paul has answered the man and said, yes, it is lawful to eat meat that has been offered in idol. But if in eating it, you know what you're doing, and you hurt your brother, you are sinning, and even exercising your liberty. Not only are you under law not to do certain things, but God requires of you to give up your liberty sometime. We give the illustration of a fellow. We come along the road in a car, and at the side of the road, the fellow's sitting with a flat tire. What's the Christian duty? Get out and help him. Okay, get out and help him. And he says to you, hey, look, I'm short of petrol. Could you give me a couple of dollars to get some? I've only got enough to get me to the station there for to get some more. And I don't have any money on me. Would you give me a couple of dollars? What's the Christian duty? Well, everybody in the class agreed that they ought to give them. You know, if they really didn't have it, that they ought to give it to them if they had it. That was good the first night. But next week, we see the same fella with a genuine flat tire again. And he's genuinely broke again. See? What do you do then? Well, the Christian duty is to get out and help him. But he needs a couple more dollars. What will you do? Well, I'll give it to him. All right, next week or next month, you see the same fella again. Different place, but under similar circumstances. And then the boy started saying, now wait a minute, you see. And then came the whole series of objections, you see. And the point was that they were willing to go only so far, but no further. They began to think the man was kind of pushing it on to them. And they felt, we all feel, that when a man pushes it on to us, that we ought not to let him do it. See? But the Bible clearly teaches that there are times and places when even our liberties ought to be withheld from us. Jesus, for example, if he had thought, no, they can't take away my rights, he never would have died. But the worst possible thing is to ask these hypothetical questions and to get a man to develop a mental attitude before he's ever faced with a situation. Because if you get those illustrations, the man becomes indignant, and that permeates the soul. And the man sets up a boundary and says, if ever I was to meet that, I wouldn't do this. And he's already prejudged the case because he feels I must have my rights. So I was really being unfair in asking the hypothetical questions. And we ought to avoid asking hypothetical questions of that nature. And furthermore, we ought to avoid answering hypothetical questions of such nature. Because don't deal with hypothetical situations, deal with the reality. I meet him Thursday night and he's shot through. There's his car lying there. What will I do? Heart of compassion, I'll help him. And then I say to myself, if he does it again, though, I won't. That's wrong right there. That one's dealt with. Let that go by the board. The next time you meet him, it's a fresh case. Make your decision then. But don't set up a mental boundary, is what we agreed. Don't set up a mental boundary and say, this is as far as I will go. 1 Corinthians 6:7, he said, why would you not be willing to suffer yourself to be defrauded? Is there ever a time when a Christian ought to suffer himself to be defrauded? Well, one of the boys in class said, no, I don't think so. Well, why did the Holy Spirit write it in 1 Corinthians 6:7? Why don't you permit yourself to be defrauded? This good brother said, and of course we argue good this way. Well, it's bad for the fellow to let him defraud you. That's a good argument. That's a good argument. But at the same time, the Christian is urged under certain circumstances, give up your liberties. Here's a fellow who says, looks Paul right spit in the eye and says to him, do I have the right to eat that meat? Is it lawful? Paul said, yes. And he said, well, if it's my liberty, I'm going to exercise it. Paul says don't do that. If you know you're going to destroy a brother. Because it hasn't become a liberty to you then. It's become your master. Boy, this 8 through 10 of 1 Corinthians affects every area of your life. And this is why Paul didn't give a yes-no answer when they asked him about the meats question. There was no yes-no answer. It was a question of, will it edify the brethren? Look, that's the law right there. It's not, is this my right? It's, will this edify the brethren? Will this make John Wallace a better man? Will it encourage him along to do what's right? Will he feel, boy, it's great to be a part of the family of Jesus? That's the question. The question is not, is it lawful? The question is, will it edify my brethren? That's the ultimate issue. The ultimate issue. What does Paul then say? He says in 13 of chapter 8, wherefore if meat causes my brother to stumble, I will eat no flesh while the earth stands, or forevermore, that I cause not my brother to stumble. When you insist on your rights and hurt a brother in the process, what are you not doing? Paul says in Romans chapter 14, let me tell you what he says in Romans 14. He says, for if because, 14:15, for if because of meat your brother is grieved, you walk no longer in love. What is a man not doing when he insists on eating his meat to spite his brother? He has quit walking in love. He's walking in knowledge. He's walking in knowledge. But he's not walking in love. And the bottom rule, the test of all things, is not knowledge, although that's involved. The test at the bottom is, does it edify my brother? Am I walking in love when I do it? That is deep, deep Scripture. It's easily understood, but it goes so deep, it's hard to fathom. When Jesus said, turn the other cheek, that was a simple part of it. If the man developed the poor in spirit, the turning the other cheek was easy. If the man became meek, that is one who will not insist on his rights, then when the Roman compelled him to walk a mile, that was soft touch. When a man developed that peaceful heart, that deep yearning to make peace, then leaving the altar and being reconciled to his brother was a soft touch. It's the heart that matters. And if your heart and mind becomes changed the way the Lord wants it, the rest will be easy. But don't permit anybody to force you into answering hypothetical questions. What if he demanded, I don't like your tie, get it off, it offends me? Well, that bothers us, you see. And we think, he wouldn't talk that way to me, I wouldn't let him. But you might let him. You see, this is the point. You might let him if the circumstances were right. If it was to save his soul. I'm convinced you very well might. Not only might, you probably would. So when you're not in the circumstances where a man's soul is hanging in balance, or whether his growth and happiness in Christ is not hanging in the balance, you can't really judge the situation right. So don't answer the question. Refuse to answer hypothetical issues. Or, if you must answer some way, answer by another one. Answer by asking about the tie. Lipscomb was told by a man, your tie offends me. He took it off and never wore another tie in his life. Suppose a man's soul was hanging in the balance on your eating your meats or not. Suppose a man's soul was hanging in the balance on your playing pool in a pool hall or not. Suppose a man's soul was hanging in balance on you watching television or not. And you knew it to be so. Would you give up your television? Would you take off your tie? Would you give up your pool in the pool hall? The man who loves that brother will say quickly, if television causes my brother to stumble, I'll not watch television while the world stands. If my playing pool over there would cause him to be lost, I won't do it. Oh, he's weak, all right, but Christ died for the weak fella, and all I'm asked to do is give up my television, you see. So what I'm saying is this. If we think about these things and insist with ourselves, I am not going to constantly demand my rights. We'll develop a spirit, an attitude like Jesus had. And then in our lives will come the big question, the only question: will my conduct, my speech, edify my brother?
Jim, it seems to me that there's, you're not developing your point, but I have questions right now that this might lead to permitting this brother to remain in bondage because of his own ignorance. And we can draw another case that a brother is offended because we take the Lord's Supper in more than one cup. Now, what do we do here? Do we forego our liberty that he might not be offended at our violation of what he considers to be, or does not this go even deeper to teach the brother the truth? Of course, it does.
Sure.
But what if you can't? I mean, evidently this is because the Lord's body has been divided over some issues that I think are, rather absurd. And yet it seems to me like if we permitted this, they would be drawing us into bondage. Another example, the Galatians. How would we apply these principles that you've set home to the Galatian church that insisted upon getting away from the liberty that we have in Christ, going back to the law, to the law of circumcision, thereby bringing us back into the bondage of the law? I'm a little fuzzy right now.
All right. The Galatian epistle is an entirely different issue. It's a basic doctrinal error, not one of moral indifference, you see. This case here is one of completely moral indifference. It's neither bad nor good, whichever way you go, you see, and the Spirit of God has so stated it. Now, Galatians is an entirely different issue. Paul didn't dare let these brethren get away with this. You see, for it was a doctrinal issue. It meant the difference between the gospel and damnation. Here, however, he said, I will let them push me to the point. And push is a bad word. But I will let them push me to the point where I will give up my meat. Paul said, I will give up my meat, right? That's what he said he would do. So, isn't Paul right in doing so? Well, of course he's right in doing so. What he says is that if my liberty, my very personal, independent right to do this thing is a matter of complete moral indifference, if I know it to be causing the damnation, resulting in the damnation of a brother, I won't do it. Now, these are big issues that you've mentioned. All I know is that the Spirit of God said to me in 1 Corinthians here, that in a matter of complete moral indifference, and that's where you'd have to say the issue, you see, in a matter of complete moral indifference, I should give up my liberty. Now, when I go with to visit in an area where the plural or the single cup brethren live, that's all I use, you know. I just drink it. I drink it out of a bucket. What am I going to do to me? And so, what you would have to do is become all things to all men. For me in the matter. But now the point you brought about teaching, that's got to be done. Paul taught right there, look, in chapter 8. He said, you're right, and now there's nothing. A meat eating situation regarding the idols, it's absolutely nothing. You're right. You fellows are correct on this issue. So he taught the weak brother. See? But he still gave up his liberty. Now what he intended to do was run parallel courts. He gave up his liberty. You know, it was possible. Now, there's some things you can't give up, you can't give them up. You understand? I don't know what, I can't even think of one right offhand, but if that's the case, you can't give them up, you can. But he ran along with two parallel lines. One, he forfeited his liberty, and number two, he taught them all the way he was doing it. Now, this is reciprocal. If I fall in love with a brother and I'm willing to give up my personal liberty in the matter, a thing of complete moral indifference, then he will be urged and taught on to do the very same thing. See? So you're right, there's a question of teaching all along here. But now Monroe, though it introduces some radical changes, I think we need radical changes in the brotherhood. I mean, regarding this whole issue, I think there are some cases where we don't have to do things the way we do them. And because we like to do them that way, and because we think it's better to do them that way, we just do it that way. And there's some things that are completely morally indifferent, you see. Though I'm not saying that these are parallel cases. I have to think that over, you know, about the orphans' homes and stuff like that there. I just have to think it over before I can answer quickly, so I'm not trying to evade the issue, confessing my ignorance. But I think there are some things that we may do in a particular manner that we could do it as easily another way and still be okay with those brothers, you see, and still make it easy. But the real question here is a personal liberty. It's not the church, you know, as such. I mean, 3 or 4 men can demand that the whole church, for example, Madison, use one container. Now, for them to demand that this is the way you've got to do it, because there are 5 or 6 over in England, or the 30 and 40 in some particular part of the state of Louisiana, it's not a question of mere personal liberty. This is a question of doing the work of God, obeying the commandment of God in a manner which is the only practical possible way. You know, because if you're going to get right down to the cup question, you're going to have one cup, just one. And the whole congregation is going to drink out of that one. It's going to take all day to get the job done. And then if you start arguing consistently, all the congregations are going to have to use one cup between them. And so there's no way to do it. Now, this is not a personal liberty. And it's a little bit off, though it's connected, mark you. It's a little bit off what Paul is here discussing. What he wants to develop, and this is the thing we need not miss, and this is the thing upon which we're not to be fuzzy. You and I are asked by the Spirit of God to develop a disposition where I, as an individual, will give up my rights if it will edify a brother and keep him from stumbling, you see. Now, what you have done is what I do. Moved that into a big area and said, what if? We do this, you see, because I've done it. And I've argued that, well, you've got to put a stop somewhere, you see. But I've never come to the point where somebody has pushed me beyond what I could do. I mean, I maybe loan a fellow some money. He's broke. See, I loan him some more. I loan him some more. And then I stop and say, well, now I've got to stop somewhere. Why have I got to stop somewhere? Well, somebody says, well, you're letting him become dishonest. No, I'll tell him. Good brother, you need to be taught here. And I teach him and I give him the money. A brother comes along, Jesus, in the book of Matthew chapter 18. This is 19, it's 18. Peter comes along and says, Lord, how often must I forgive my brother? 7 times? Jesus says, no, 490. Well, you know what he meant. He meant, don't put this number business on. I want you to forgive him every time he repents. Well, what do you do? Well, now, wait a minute. I don't mean forgiving him once or twice or 3 times or 4 times, but Lord, that's just, that's a little bit too much. Jesus said, if he sins again you and he's penitent, forgive him, even if it's bukus of hundreds of times. Now, my spirit rebels again there, you see. I said, now, Lord, look, and if I keep on just saying, okay, and doing my best, and smiling at it, I feel that the man is not really trying. But Jesus said, in that case, you're prejudging the issue. Don't prejudge the issue. He sinned against you 400 times already. Forgive it. Now today he comes anew, and he's sinned against you again. Think it over again, afresh. Not in the light of the 400 that's happened before. He's repented of those. Are you going to hold it against him all the time? Well, if he did, God will do the same with us one day. But we know better than that. We approach God with every new crime, and we tell him, here I come again. God will remember those other ones again. He looks at us again afresh, and that's what he wants you and me to do. And same with the question of liberty. Jesus stood up and threw men out of the temple when they were going against God. But when it came to his own self-defense, that was God's defense. But when it came to self-defense, he didn't do any self-defending. He let him push him around, and, and the will of God was done. Now, I know this, if I know nothing else, that Paul teaches me, Jim, there is a time when a Christian ought to willingly give up his liberty. And what I have done in my life is said, yes, but, never mind the buts. The but is the mistake in my life. I know all the boundaries, you know, and I know where to put all, I'm not going any further than that. I know all the modifiers in Scripture. Hang the modifiers. In God's name, why don't I once in a while just live for the minute and deal with all these problems for the minute? Not what he did last year, the year before, not what he might do next month. But now, let me deal with it now. And Jesus teaches in that Sermon on the Mount, and this is all it is right here, 8 through 10. This is the Sermon on the Mount, written in the book of 1 Corinthians. And Jesus insists on not using modifiers. He never uses them. When he says, he that smites you in one cheek, turn the other. Now you can see the faces of those people. What? And he never stops to modify it. And he said, he that would borrow of thee, turn him not away. Well, we say, well, what about 2 Thessalonians chapter 3? But he didn't. Why didn't he? Because if Jesus had stopped to modify everything, he would have modified it into platitudes. They're not platitudes, they're beatitudes. And Jesus says, develop a spirit and let the rest take care of itself. Don't adopt, here's how I will deal with this problem if it comes up, and the other problem if it comes up, and if these circumstances are such, here's what I'll say. He said, forget all that. Develop the spirit. And then, when you meet the circumstance, deal with it as you meet it. And he does it all the way through. And so the beauty of it all is that when a man gives up his liberties, he's not the slave. Take the case of the fellow who was compelled by the Roman to go a mile. The Roman comes along and says, I want you to go a mile. He says, all right. Takes it a mile. For that mile, he's a debtor to the Roman. But then he walks a second mile, and what happens to the Roman? He becomes the debtor. See? The man then rises above. You can't beat him. He rises above all this persecution and all this suppression. You can't steal his rights from him if he wants to give them to you. You can't do that. And so, this is the kind of spirit that Jesus is teaching. So, you and I, for example, if we were slaves, if you've been born in slavery, a master worked you 20 hours a day, and you work drudgery, 20 hours a day, give you 4 hours of sleep only because he has to, so that you become a Christian. The next day you do 20 hours, no longer drudgery. It's forgone now, say. But then you do 21 hours. For those 20 hours, you're his slave, only you're not really. Your heart's changed altogether. Now you work for the Lord, not for him. But you do a 21st hour. For those 20 hours, you're his slave. And that 21st hour, he's become yours. So Jesus says, with the right disposition and with the right heart, you can't lose. How can you? Paul is here suggesting that nothing in our lives must be solved simply by an intellectual answer, but by a spirit and a disposition. Chapter 9. In chapter 9, the Apostle Paul is still continuing the same discussion. He's still on the same discussion. And he wants to illustrate how he gave up his liberty. He had the right to payment during his preaching, but he didn't take it. Why didn't he? He had a good purpose in mind. He forfeited the liberty to financial support. And he's saying again, look, in the case of meats, why don't you give up your liberty for the sake of your brother? And they say, that's all right for you talking. What did you ever give up? Well, he tells him what he gave up here in chapter 9. Here we go. Am I not free? Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen Jesus our Lord? Are not ye my work of the Lord? All those statements are answered with an affirmative, of course. And consequently, Paul has the right to financial support. If to others I am not an apostle, yet at least I am to you. For the seal of mine apostleship are ye in the Lord. My defense to them that examine me is this. Have we no right to eat and to drink? Have we no right to lead about a wife that is a believer, even as the rest of the apostles and the brethren of the Lord and Cephas? Or I only and Barnabas, have we not a right to forbear working? He said, have we not the right to support? Are we supposed to have to work all the time for what money we get? Well, no, they had the right to support, all right. What soldier, verse 7, ever serveth at his own charges? Common sense, he's arguing common sense. He has argued in verse 4 that example proves his right to support. He now argues in verse 7, common sense shows his right to support. What soldier ever served at his own charges? Who planteth a vineyard and eateth not the fruit thereof? Or who feedeth a flock and eateth not of the milk of the flock? Is that just plain common sense, isn't it? He said in verse 8, but is that just a human argument? Or does the law not say the same? Well, it does. Deuteronomy 25 says, in the law of Moses, thou shalt not muzzle the ox when he treadeth out the corn. And that was written, he says. Was that written only for oxen? Of course not. The principle is that the laborer is worthy of his hire, and he'll go on to mention that in a minute. So, example in verse 5 proves his right to support. Common sense in 7 and 8 shows his right to support. The law in verses 9 and following shows his right to support. Verse 10, or saith he, it is surely for our sake. Well, of course he did, for our sake it was written. Because he that plieth ought to plough in hope, and he that thresheth to thresh in hope of partaking. If we sow unto you spiritual things, is it a great matter if we shall reap your carnal things? If others partake of this right over you, do not we yet more? That's due to the relationship, you see. Nevertheless, we didn't use the right, but we bear all things that we may cause no hindrance to the gospel of Jesus. He said, I forfeited my right. Like I'm asking you to forfeit your rights regarding meats and other areas. 13, know ye not that they that minister about sacred things eat of the things of the temple? Here goes to the law again, and shows the right to support. And they that wait upon the altar have their portion with the altar. And then he moves from the law to Jesus. Even so did the Lord ordain that they that proclaim the gospel should live of the gospel. He said, but I've used none of these things. And I write not these things that it may be so done in my case. He said, I'm not asking you for money. For it were good for me rather to die than any man should make my glorying void. For if I preach the gospel, I have nothing to glory of. For necessity is laid on me. For woe is unto me if I preach not the gospel. For if I do this of mine own will, I have a reward. But if not, of mine own will, I have a stewardship entrusted to me. What he's simply saying there in his characteristic fashion is, listen, I don't feel I'm free to preach. I feel there's any compulsion. I'd preach if there was no money anywhere. I don't need money to preach. I'll preach anyway. Now, if I could take it or leave it, said he, it wouldn't be to me the preaching job that I have. He said, but that's not the way I am. I have got to preach the Word. That's what he's saying. 18. Well, what is his reward then? It's not money, that's for sure. Well, what is it then, 18? That when I preach the gospel, I may make the gospel without charge, so as not to use to the full my right in the gospel. Notice again, he says in verse 12 he didn't use his right, and then again here in 18 he says he did not use his right. And then in verse 19, for though I was free from all men, I brought myself under bondage to all that I might gain the more. He said, listen, I entered my responsibility willingly and gladly. And part of his responsibility was the giving up of this right to financial support. To the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might gain the Jews. To them that are under the law is under the law, not being myself under the law, that is a Mosaic law, that I might gain them that are under the law. To them that are without law, as without law, that is, he would eat pork and he would do anything that, they would do. He says, of course, I'm not without law to God, but I'm under law to Christ. Well, why did he come to them that are without law, as without law? Well, he tells us in the latter part of 21, that I might gain them that are without the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might gain the weak. I become all things to all men, that I may by all means save some. Man, everybody's in there. The Greek is in there. When Paul went with them, he'd eat any kind of meat. But when he was in the presence of the weak, when he was working with the weak people, what did he become? He became a weak one also. If they were sitting at a table and the weak brother refused this meat, knowing it was of from the marketplace and the temple sacrifices, Paul would have refused the meat also. And that weak brother would have been branded weak, but Paul would have been branded weak also. And man, that's hard to take. When you have to stand by a brother who's weak, and you know his weakness is something you yourself don't endorse, and because you're standing by him in his weakness, people think you're weak also. The old pride gives you a buffeting, and you think, well, why don't you tell them you're not weak? Why don't you tell him that's just his opinion? But Paul wouldn't do this. He stood by the weak. Oh, he taught them in prayer. There's no doubt about it. But whenever it came to a showdown, he stood by the weak. He stood by the weak. And he became weak. And everybody said, well, look at him, you know. There's a fellow can't even eat meats, and he's supposed to be a gospel preacher, you know. But he stuck by the weak man and taught, no doubt about it, taught as the opportunity come up. The point he's making is, gentlemen, somebody would probably say it, you know. Oh, it's all right, you talking. You're not involved in the problem. You only not asked to be given to give up anything. Paul said, is that right? I've given up financial support. Have you any idea why? He goes on and tell him, said, I've got the right, but I didn't take it because I wanted the gospel to be free. More than that, he said, I become a Jew to a Jew, Gentile to a Gentile. The weak man will become weak. Doesn't make any difference to me, he said. Me doesn't, look, nothing means anything to me. I'll give it all up. Now, when he gets to 27 here, he said, but I buffet my body and bring it into bondage, lest by any means after that I preach to others, I myself should be rejected. He wasn't talking about unlawful things here. He's not talking about fornication and the like. That's not his discussion. This whole section is a discussion of liberties. The whole section is a discussion of liberties. He says here, look, even in the matters of meat, in any matter lawful, I make sure that I am the master of my liberty. I stay on top of my liberty, lest in exercising my liberty, I eventually become a castaway. All right. So he says in 23, and I do all things for the gospel's sake, that I may be a joint partaker thereof. Know ye not that they that run in a race run all, but one receiveth the prize? Even so run, that ye may attain. He's not saying that only one of you will get the prize. He, in 24, says, everybody runs to get the one prize. Everybody knows that there's only one going to get it. So they work hard to do it. And he says, you do the same thing. You work hard at this business. 25. And every man that striveth in the games exerciseth self-control in all things. What? In only bad, extreme things? Did they only give up the boozing and the carousing into the early hours of the night? Or did they give up what? Well, they gave up ordinary things. Maybe there was a party going on at 11 o'clock and they went to bed at 8. Maybe there was real good food sitting there, beautiful stuff, good to eat and succulent. They'd give that up also. Maybe there were nights free when they could have gone out with a girl. Maybe there were nights free when they could have gone out with a family, good things. And what did they do? In order to win a prize, they gave up even the lawful things. Even the things that everybody knew that everybody had a right to partake of. But these who wanted to do a good job give those things up. 25. And every man that striveth in the games exercises self-control in all things. Now they do it to receive a corruptible crown, but we ain't incorruptible. I therefore so run as not uncertainly. He says, I know where I'm heading. I know what I'm going for. So fight I as not beating the air. This is the boxing. You know, the shadow box, you see. He says, I'm not kidding. In this fight, I take it seriously. Boy, I land punches. I'm not kidding around. 27. I'm not shadow boxing, but I land punches on my body. I buffet my body and bring it into bondage, lest by any means after that I have preached to others, I myself should be rejected. He says, liberty or not, I give them up. I teach myself discipline, but that's not the only reason for it. Discipline, of course, is to save the brethren. He said, I give up even my liberties. I keep myself in check so that my liberties will never become my master. Chapter 10, 1 and following. The Corinthians are full of themselves. They're just happy that they know as much as they know. See? And they tell Paul, we know everything. We've got the relationship with Jesus. Everything's all right with us. Paul says, don't be so cocksure about the whole thing. Don't be so absolutely sickeningly sure about this. Let me tell you something, said he. I don't want you to be ignorant, brethren, 10:1, that our fathers were all under the cloud and passed through the sea, and were all baptized under Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They did all eat the same spiritual food, and they did all drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of a spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. Now, they all had wonderful experiences. That's the point he's making. They all were aligned with Moses. Moses was very definitely their leader, for they entered into the Red Sea, and that's as if they were baptized under Moses. They followed him there, and since they followed him there, they identified Moses as their leader, you see. And they did all eat the same spiritual food, the manna. They enjoyed that great experience. They also had a great experience of drinking that spiritual drink. He didn't mean that it wasn't real food and one real drink. It was just plain water and plain food. But when it says it's spiritual, it means it's of divine origin. That's the point. For they drank of a spiritual rock. It wasn't a spiritual rock. It was a real rock. And that rock followed them. And the rock was Christ. It wasn't literally Christ. It was a type of Christ, you see. Everywhere they went, they found this rock and they hit it. And it gave forth what was needed. And so Christ, when we smote him, he gave forth what we needed. And so the rock was typical of Jesus. Howbeit, in spite of all those experiences, in spite of having this relationship with Moses, in spite of enjoying all these wonderful things, these men had a bunch of gifts, you see. They knew a lot of stuff. They had these miracles all the way through it. Chapter 1, verse 5 said, you've come behind in no gift, waiting for the coming of the Lord. And they were cocksure about it, you see. He says, well, I know men who had tremendous blessings. I know men who had wonderful spiritual experiences. But, verse 5, with most of them God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now, these things were our examples, to the intent we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. Neither be idolaters as some of them, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Neither let us commit fornication as some of them committed, and fell in one day 23,000. There's a different number given in Numbers 25. But the reason for it is that Paul says 23,000 died in one day. And the bigger number in Numbers 25 was the whole affair. Verse 9, neither let us make trial of the Lord as some of them made trial and perished by the serpents. Neither murmur ye as some of them murmured and perished by the destroyer. Now these things happened unto them by way of example, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages are come. Wherefore, let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. Now he's talking to an arrogant bunch. They're cocksure about everything. And he says, buddy, listen. Just be very careful. Because as those men with Moses had great experiences and had a great leader, and God had definitely been with them, they died, they were lost. So the man who begins to become really arrogant may be lost also. Just be careful how you talk and be careful how you think. Be careful what kind of a heart you have. Remember, chapter 8, verse 3. He that thinketh he knoweth anything knoweth nothing, yet as he ought to know. He that loveth God, the same is known of him. It's not your marvelous experiences that matter, says Paul. It's your heart. It's your heart. 13. There hath no temptation taken you, but such as man can bear. This comes in, verse 13 comes in and says, now wait a minute, you are tying me to the wall. You are making my life hard to bear. Paul says, buddy, nothing that you are faced with has not already been faced by somebody else. So you're being pressured and pushed. Well, there hath no temptation taken you, but such as man can bear. Don't start whining to me. But more than that, but God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that which you're able. That's great comfort right there. Great comfort. But will with the temptation make also the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. So he tells them then, gentlemen, shape up. Shape up. Don't be so arrogant and insolent. So, but now he moves to a problem where the very knowing gentlemen didn't know as much as they thought they knew. Up to this point, all he's been dealing with is the principle of even if it's your right, give it up. But these Corinthians didn't know nearly as much as they thought they knew, because what they were doing was going into the temple, the pagan temple, where the oaths were being given and being made. And they were drinking libations unto the gods and to the demons. And Paul says, you can't do that without communing with the demons. Listen, 14. Wherefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. I speak as to wise men. Judge you what I say. There was a little bit of irony there. I speak to a wise man. He said, come on, ask yourself. Judge you what I say. The cup of blessing which we bless, is it not a communion of the blood of Christ? He said, you know, in the Lord's Day, when you get there and you offer thanks to God concerning the blood of Jesus Christ represented by that cup, he said, what happens there? Well, the knowing Corinthian would say, well, we commune with Christ, of course, naturally. See, well, that's good, that's good. The bread, the latter part of 16, which we break, is it not a communion of the body of Christ? Well, the answer again would come, well, of course it is. When you offer things concerning the body of Christ as related to this bread, you commune with Jesus. Well, he says, seeing that we who are many are one loaf, one bread, one body, for we all partake of the one bread. Behold, that indicates how we commune together. We're all in the one body, we're all one loaf, and that's his figure, one loaf. We all partake together with Jesus. We're all in the same boat when we do this. Behold, Israel after the flesh. Have not they that eat the sacrifices communion with the altar? Well, surely, those who served in the altar, they were servants of the altar. They just communed with that system. They were involved in that system. They became part of it, and the expression of that becoming part of it was their eating the gifts of the altar. 19. What say I then? That a thing sacrificed to idols is anything, or that an idol is anything? Well, the answer is no. It's not the meat, and it's not the stick or the stone that you're in front of there. But I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And he said, when you go to the temple and they make this sacrifice, to whom do you think they're sacrificing it? Well, it's certainly not to God. He said, they're communing with demons, you dumbbells, just as you commune with Jesus in the Lord's Supper. Just as those Judaizers commune with the Mosaic system in which they're involved and they become a part of it, so do you screwball, when you move into a pagan temple and you sing the songs and you pray the prayers and you make the oaths and you drink the cup under the evil geniuses behind the idols. He said, you're having fellowship with ungodliness. You can't do that. You can't do that. 21. You can't drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You can't partake of the table of the Lord and of the table of demons. Or do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? If so, are you ready to take what's coming? Well, no, not likely. He said, listen, stay away from that temple and stay away from those oaths and stay away from those pagan feasts. You're in the wrong. It's not a liberty. He said, all things are lawful. Now he's back on things that are morally indifferent. But not all things are expedient. All things are lawful, but not all things edify. We've already said that in order for a thing to be expedient, number one, it has to be lawful. Number two, it has to be edifying. And number three, it must not be enslaving. If it's not lawful, it's not expedient. If it's not lawful, it's not expedient. It must be lawful in order to be expedient. If it's not edifying, it's not expedient. The word expedient meaning advisable and helpful. It's not a good thing to do if it's not edifying. And number three, if it enslaves a man, it's not expedient. If it gets a grip on a man. And that's one of the big arguments put mammon anyway against smoking, drugs, and the like. That which can get a grip on a man and it can't break. Has definitely not expedient. And that which is flagrantly inexpedient becomes unlawful. All right then, what should they be asking? They should be asking, does it edify my brethren? That is the bottom question of the whole bunch. Verse 24, let no man seek his own, but each his neighbor's good. He said, think about edifying others as well as yourself, would you? 25, whatsoever is sold in the shambles eat, asking no question for conscience sake. The shambles was a marketplace, of course. And what happened after the sacrifices at the temple, the priests would take their share and sell the rest in the marketplace. And the people would go down into the marketplace and they would eat. They would buy their meat there. Some of the weak ones would say, was this meat, did this meat come from the temple, you say? Paul says, brethren, go down there and get that meat and just eat. Don't ask any questions. Say, don't ask any questions for conscience sake. For the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. He's saying again, you fellows are right now about the meat question. It's not wrong to eat that meat. 27, if one of them that believe not biddeth you to a feast, that's a private supper, you say, and ye are disposed to go, he said, if you want to go, whatsoever is set before you eat, asking no question for conscience sake. But if any man say unto you, this hath been offered in sacrifice, eat not for his sake that showed it, and for conscience sake. Conscience, I say, not your own, for he has no conscience in the matter, but the others. But now then comes the question, why is my liberty judged by another's conscience? Isn't that tough? If I partake with thankfulness, why am I even spoken of for that for which I give thanks? He said, you know what? That is funny. He says, but my food and my drink and everything else must be viewed in the light of will it edify. Now this is not for babies. And this is deep stuff here. This is for mature man. You can't expect kids, 15 and 16 and 17, 18 years of age, to grab a hold of this here and just go to it like a duck to water. But we need to teach these principles. He says, if meat's set before you, eat it. If before you eat somebody says, that there was bought in the shambles, it's idle meat, smell at him and shove it aside. Then the host will say, why are you not eating that? And he will say, or that any rancor? Well, I can't. There was meat offered to idols. And then the weak brother, you say, would have company. See? And they were standing by his weak brother. But the man objects in his heart and he says, God, why is my food and everything, why is my liberty pushed aside because this good brother here doesn't like it? Paul says that is Christianity. That there is Christianity. Oh, listen, the law you can fulfill, but Christianity you can't. Whether therefore, 31, you eat or drink, or whatsoever you do, do all to the glory of God. Give no occasion of stumbling either to Jews or to Greeks or to the church of God, even as I also please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of the many, that they may be saved. Be ye imitators of me, even as I also am of Christ. I believe we'll have a cup of coffee. Okay then, the next section we enter is chapter 11, 2 through 16, concerning the veiling of the women. Okay, there are a number of things that must be stated before we enter this section. Number one, long hair on man is not inherently immoral. Else the Nazarite vow would never have been endorsed by God. Numbers 6:13 and following, and Judges 13:5. Numbers 6:13 and following, and Judges 13:5. Long hair in man is not inherently immoral, or else the Nazarite vow would never have been endorsed by God. Number 2, a head covering on a man was not inherently immoral. Let me restate that. A head covering on a man during worship was not inherently immoral. A head covering on a man during worship was not inherently immoral. Else the mitre of the high priest would not have been endorsed by God. See Exodus 28:4. And Exodus 39:28. Yes. Exodus 28:4. 28:4 and 39:28. Number 3. The Holy Spirit did not bring the veil to Greece. He found it there when Paul arrived. Number 4. That a woman was always considered immodest. That a woman was always considered immodest when unveiled before a man not her husband. Is extremely doubtful. See Genesis 24:64 and following. Number 5. In New Testament times, among both Greeks and Romans, reputable women wore a veil in public. That is from the ISBE, Volume 5, page 3047. That last point. ISBE, Volume 5, page 3047, 3047. This ISBE also said that to appear in public without it was an act of bravado, or even worse, and that they were especially strict about it in Tarsus, Paul's hometown. All right, number 6. Women of low character. Women of low character had their hair shorn. Or their head shaved. Or their head shaved. Vincent. It's from Vincent. Volume 3, page 247. That's Vincent's word studies, of course. All right. Number 7. The woman is not said to be subject to her husband, but to the man. Number 7, the woman is not said to be subject to her husband, but to the man. That's true, of course, the woman was subject to her husband. But Paul's discussion in 1 Corinthians 11 is not husband and wife. It's man and woman. Paul is urging the very same principle in chapter 11, the first 16 verses, as he urged in chapters 8, 9, and 10. In the light of those points that we just made, it's clear that Paul did not introduce the use of the veil among the women. They had it when he got there. And the veil in public was indicative of a reputable woman. The woman without repute was the one who was unveiled. It must be made clear that the veil here, spoken of a woman in verse 5, is really a veil. Not a little piece of paper on her head, not a strip of feathers, but a veil. The word katakaluptu means that which covers downward, you see. So, it's a veil. Now keep those 7 points in mind as we get through this. He praises them in verse 2 that they hold fast to traditions even as he delivered them. So you can see that all traditions are not bad. If they're biblical, they're all right. He said, but I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God. Now, he's not saying the head of every woman is a husband. There's a divine order reflected in a man and a woman. The creation of man and woman not only spoke of Christ and the church, but it reflected the divine unity. You have Christ under God, even as the woman is under the man. He says in verse 4, every man praying or prophesying having his head covered dishonoreth his head. The veil was a token of subjection, but not even so much subjection as it was the place of a woman. The women were veiled. The men didn't go around veiled, although to go around veiled is not inherently immoral. In this area in which Paul was working, and other areas like it, for a man to be veiled at worship was thought to be incorrect. That was thought to be wrong. That's the way Paul made it. And that's how he accepted it. Now, when he talks about a man praying or prophesying having his head covered dishonors his head, that wasn't always true. It wasn't true everywhere. It was only true in some areas. For example, the high priest, when he wore the mitre, Paul never thought a thing of it. Paul himself, if the scholars are correct, when he went to worship in a Jewish synagogue, he wore a skull cap of some kind. So when he said, every man praying or prophesying having his head covered dishonors his head. Now, there are 2 possibilities here. When it says he dishonors his head, it means he dishonors Christ, you see, for not taking the place where he belongs. It's also possible, in fact, it's probable, it seems to me, that both these things are true. Not only does a man dishonor his head, that is Jesus, but he dishonors himself.